hello, all you majestic mountain goats out there. Welcome to another episode of A Little Greener, a podcast all about conservation, nature, and sustainability. I am one of your hosts, Casey, and I'm joined by Sarah. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, mountain goats. Did not see any mountain goats on my trip.
Bummer. They are, ironically, I have because they're one of my favorite bands, and so I have seen some mountain goats recently in concert. Unrelated to nature,
Uh,
but
Excellent. Well, that's delightful. We've been
oh,
gone a couple weeks.
yes.
Casey and I have not chatted with each other in a couple of weeks. I've been on vacation, so I guess, did some fun things while I was on vacation too.
Yeah. My sister and I both love the Mountain Goats. It's a indie rock band. If you're coming in fresh, they might not be for you, but they are for us. And we saw them in concert when I lived in Indiana, because that's where the lead singer was originally from.
Oh,
And we enjoyed seeing them so much that this is our fourth time seeing them in concert. It's one of those
nice.
like if you're lucky enough to be alive at the same time that your favorite band is touring and it's financially reasonable,
Yes.
I feel like you should take those opportunities when you can because that's not always going to happen. Like my favorite band of all time is the Beatles. I'm never going to see the Beatles perform, so I might as well take as many of my Mountain Goat choices as possible. So
I
that was fun.
support that. And speaking of which, this is not a music podcast, but that was
No,
the bummer of my vacation is one of my favorite bands announced their retirement from touring
Aerosmith,
while I
yeah.
was on vacation, and I had tickets like they were supposed to be doing
Oh,
a farewell tour,
you
and
saw
I
them right
had
before my
tickets.
wedding.
I did, and it was amazing. And now I'm extra thankful that I did that because clearly that was
Yeah.
my only shot. Now this
You
is,
just proved my point 100%.
yep,
See them while you can.
I
Buy those
support
concert
you.
tickets.
That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
But this time you did not go on a road trip to see me get married and see Aerosmith. You went on a
Oh,
road trip to somewhere else, and that's what we're going to talk about today, right?
it is. Yeah, it's what we're going to talk about. I'm going to try not to spoil too much of it in the intro here because it is what the episode's going to be about. But I did go out west to Colorado. Casey, my road trip to your wedding and doing that concert is one of my favorite trips that I've ever taken. This might have topped it,
I'm
though.
not insulted. Colorado
I
is like incredible.
Right. I mean, the events themselves, but even just like the drive up there for like I got a flat tire on my way up to see you and the concert, and that kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
I don't know, just everything, almost everything. We'll talk about some things that didn't go well, but it just was a really smooth trip, really beautiful. My first time going to the Rocky Mountains, so much cool stuff. Good family time as well. So I met my mom and my aunt and my cousin out there, and that was just beyond wonderful to get to spend this time with them. So it was a really wonderful trip, but very nature heavy. So that's what we're gonna kind of just chat through, sort of some thoughts that I had along the way and some things that I saw, and hopefully that will be an enjoyable listen for you guys. Casey, to kind of kick it off though, so this was something that we'd wanted to do, like my family, my mom, my aunt, my cousin and I, like we've talked about it for a long time. My mom, they have done that trip together, the three of them before. I have never done it, and so my mom's been trying to get me to come out. So I finally decided that I would make the drive, and so this is, a big check on my list of things that I've wanted to see. So my question for you is, what is a bucket list item? And I'm thinking of like not just a sort of wishful thinking, but what is
Right.
a bucket list trip that you actually plan on taking? Maybe you have something planned that you and your husband are talking about already, or like what is just that next place to visit for you within the United States?
I have a couple on I've been really lucky to see a lot of parts of the US. I love out west. My grandparents are lived out there for a lot of my childhood, so we visited them several times and I love that. I think my next place that I want to take like a little weekend getaway to is a dark park. I think the
Yes.
closest one to me is in northwestern Pennsylvania. And so that just feels like the most feasible if I wanted to take like a weekend away
Yeah.
and leave our kiddo with some relatives that we could get to one of the US's dark parks and just see the stars.
That's such a good answer.
It's vague, but that's what
No, I like
it
that.
feels accomplishable.
Yeah. Ugh. That's a really good one. And now you're making me realize that I did not really go outside at night while I was on my vacation because I think I saw somewhere that Estes Park, where I stayed for a couple of nights,
That's where my grandparents are from.
is a dark sky town, whatever
Yeah.
it's called. It's a, designated dark sky area. And I didn't go take advantage of that. So that's a bummer. So I
Well,
think, yeah, that's a great one.
you've got other travel plans in mind too, so
I
you've got
do, yeah. So
opportunities. Yes.
I don't know what my next bucket list place will be. I feel like making this drive to Colorado like unlocked a door for me though, because I did not find the drive to be that bad. I found it to be doable for myself. If you're a newer listener, I'm afraid of flying, so I drive everywhere. But I do feel like I could make more drives out that way. And so I don't know what's next. I have to do some research. For some reason, really want to go to Arches
Yeah,
National
no, that's
Park.
a super
It just
cool
looks
looking
amazing
place.
to
I've never
me.
been there
Yeah,
either.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's on my list, but I'm actually going now, a sort of impromptu trip planned. I'll be up in the Smokies for a weekend in a few weeks. So I do enjoy those mountains. So lots of cool places to
We are
visit.
very lucky to live in a very cool country. Yes.
Yes, we are. And so for this episode, we're just going to be chatting a little bit about my first time visit to the Rockies. So stick around for that. All right, thanks for joining us for another episode of A Little Greener. Once again, this episode was just inspired by my trip to the Rockies. I had such a good time and also didn't have a lot of spare time to be writing a full episode. So I figured, hey, this was pretty nature-based, so let's take some time to chat a little bit about some of the things that I saw and thought about, things that happened along the way, and hopefully there will be a piece of something in there somewhere for you to think about or just walk away with, or just enjoy living vicariously through my trip, I guess. So, like I said, I did drive. So this was a 3-day drive, driving from Central Florida out to Rocky Mountain National Park.
You are a braver soul than I. I just could not.
You
I get
could.
I get so cabin fevery in
Oh.
a car for that long.
Really? See, I
Yeah.
really like it. I like being able to be on my own schedule. I like to be able to eat when I want to eat, stop when I want to stop, all of that. And plus that the third day when you're out basically like driving through Kansas, it's just you put your cruise control on and
No, that's true.
you
Yeah.
sit back and it's just nice and stress free. And I'm surprised you say that you get cabin fever because I think for me that was one of the things that I was going to talk about was just that road trips are so, I mean, you just have so much time to think and you're seeing the different landscapes. Time
I don't want to think.
is not converted. But so I feel like, Casey, I've been inspired by years of doing this podcast now, where my brain just sort of wanders to thinking about the environment and the things that I'm driving by. And I kind of get these peaks and valleys when I'm driving, of times where I feel really positive about the environment and nature, and then it just like dips into these valleys of depression about how we've used the land around us,
Yeah.
right? So I feel like day one of driving for me is a lot of just, I don't want to say urban because a lot of times you're just driving through sort of open grass, but there's just billboards in between the cities. It's just there's
Sure.
always just so much literal signage of human life. It just feels like we have taken over the entire landscape the whole way, right? And then as you start to get a little further, maybe up north, and you're starting to make that turn out towards the west, there's maybe a little part like driving through the mountains in Tennessee, or if you get into like the rocky walls in parts of Kentucky and things like that, or you get a nice patch where just you can just see trees and there's not a lot of billboards. I start to feel like, oh, there is some natural space still out
Yeah.
there, right? Whether that, I mean, that's probably very much an illusion in those areas, but you still sort of you can just enjoy that beauty of the green space. And then, of course, the farther out west that you're getting, you hit the agriculture
Hmm.
fields as far as the eye can see. And I was trying to look up some statistics. I don't know if you remember anything from when we did our like beef episode or anything like that, but I was actually struggling to find a lot of good numbers about like land use percentages in the United
Mm-hmm.
States. But it was just a reminder. I don't know if this is maybe more or less if you're flying over the country versus driving, but it was just a reminder of how much space agriculture really takes. Yeah.
Yes, and I recently watched a video with Hank Green, one of our favorite science
Hmm.
communicators, where he made some like quote unquote bold predictions for 100 years from now. How will humans, 100 years from now live in a different way than we do? And one of the things that I think was like a hopeful prediction is that he thought a lot of the West and like the middle areas of the US would be a lot more wild than they are right
Hmm.
now. Probably because we would be eating less meat, and so much of our just like crops agriculturally are grown to feed our livestock then. So if we ate less
Right.
livestock, then we would use less land for farming and we could potentially have wilder areas. And that
Yeah.
that just struck that thought in my head of yeah, the land use that we dedicate towards feeding ourselves is I'm not by any means a food systems expert, but it is pretty wild
It
the amount of
is.
area we take up.
But it also reminds me too of just how vastly different our perspectives are and our different cultures and our different levels of awareness of different things
Hmm.
throughout the country too. Because obviously you and I would see that very much as a positive thing if we were able to convert some of our agriculture use land
Sure.
back to natural space. But I'm also driving down these roads and seeing like the family farm names,
Yeah.
over the different and this is livelihoods for people and this is what they know and this is so it that was something that I was thinking about too as I was driving through all of these different areas and just thinking about the different ways of life and the different perspectives that everybody has. I think even though I try to be somebody who does not stick in a bubble, like I try to
Yeah.
welcome in, media, news, whatever, social media from different walks of life. I think that you still do sort of get enveloped in your little bubble of what you're used to as well. I'm not saying that that changes my what I think is ultimately the way that we
Right.
need to move, but I do think it is just a good reminder and a good refresher of all of the different walks of life that we come from in our country. So,
Lots of good benefits to traveling just to like immerse yourself
yeah,
in a different way of thinking. Just
absolutely.
thinking about how the environment around us influences what we think is normal and what we value in our lives based on just what's around us. Like, I feel like being on the East Coast, convenience is a very high demand sort of feature. So I remember when I even just moving out to Indiana, I was so annoyed when I first moved there because everyone moves so slowly compared to out east. Out east, we're like, let's get things done. Don't waste time. And maybe that's why I don't enjoy the idea of driving that
There
far.
you go.
But I mean, just even the amount of time that it takes so when my grandma lived out in, I think it was like either western part of Colorado, we would go around the whole state, but she lived in the western part of Colorado where it was up in the mesas and a little bit more in the deserty part of the state. And it, to there was two restaurants within a reasonable driving distance, one of which was Wendy's.
Yeah.
And to go to see the movies, we would have had to drive an hour. And that was just normal. And that's normal in a lot
Uh-huh.
of places. But just like very not normal to me. So different ways to look at things, different ways to spend your time and what you value.
When I was getting ready for my trip, one of the I just the timing worked out. I just kept seeing this meme about Midwesterners about basically about how we'll drive places, and it's like, normal people, oh, look, we can get a flight to Colorado for whatever.
Yeah.
Midwesterners, oh, a 15-hour drive to Colorado doesn't sound so bad.
It's
I'm
in
like
your
that is
bones.
exactly my attitude about things. So that is funny, but yeah, again, different perspectives. And speaking of things that are unfamiliar to you, one of the bigger things that kind of went wrong during my trip was that there were multiple wildfires in the area that I had not somehow this had not come across my radar as we were preparing to go. I guess I wasn't watching a lot of news. I was busy trying to get things done, but I guess it must have been my the night after my first full drive. So the reason that we took this trip at this time was because I had signed up to run a race just outside of Rocky Mountain National Park. I was going to run a 5K. And the first night, I'm sitting in the hotel and I get an email that says, "Hey, we're monitoring the situation with these wildfires. Right now, the race is still on, but we'll keep you posted." And so I started reading about these wildfires, and there were two pretty big ones in the area. And after my second day of driving, they did in fact email everybody and cancel the
Wow.
race, which ended up being fine. Rocky Mountain National Park stayed open. We were staying at a rental house. So I talked to those owners and they were like, everything's fine here. The house will be ready for you. So we decided to go ahead and move forward with our trip. And they were not close enough, like we couldn't see them or
Hmm.
anything, but evacuees from other areas were coming to the area that we were staying in. Air quality was
Yes.
not
Yeah.
great, and all of that. And this is just something that is complete, wildfires are a thing that I hear about on the news. It's not something that I've ever really experienced up close.
Right.
And I was a little freaked out. Like I signed up for the local text alerts and everything like that, just so that I could stay monitored. There were like phase 2 fire bans in effect. So no outdoor, you couldn't have a barbecue, no
Right.
smoking outside, things like that, were all in effect. So that was really interesting. Life seemed to be pretty normal. Like everybody, nothing had changed where we were staying or anything like that. But like I said, the air quality was definitely noticeable. So that was interesting. And one of the fires was called the Alexander Mountain Fire. That was going while this was happening, only got fully contained a couple of days ago. So it took 3 weeks for it to be fully contained. And so that was just eye-opening once again to
Yeah.
read about and hear about. And they have determined that both of those fires were caused by humans. Don't know how exactly, don't know intentional versus unintentional, but this all still can be related back to the climate and
Right.
changing climate because hotter and drier summers are going to continue to make these fires more likely. Even if this was a human caused, if it was an accidental thing, that still contributed to by climate change. And so even though I live here in Central Florida and obviously we see things like worsening storm seasons and all of that, even being in the center of the state, I'm a little bit removed
Sure.
from that. And so this just once again being closer to a situation that I wasn't familiar with before just is a reminder of how real the impacts of a changing climate are. And once again, I'm not saying that these specific fires wouldn't have happened without climate change. That's not
Right.
what we're talking about. Like I said, we're just recognizing that a changing climate makes things like this more likely to happen more often.
We're gonna have to do an episode on fire, I think, partially for my own benefit, because there is so much misinformation
Sure.
slash like uncertainty for me about what best practices for fire are, because there's a
We
lot
do
of
controlled
there's
burns and
yeah, controlled burns, prescribed burns are positive.
mhm.
Indigenous peoples include those as part of their wildlife management, and stopping that has also made wildfires a lot more intense. But I think wildfires in particular evoke that sort of like that in drought
Yeah.
feels like climate change to me. Do you to explain that a little bit more is I climate change has always in my head correlated with hot because our
Uh-huh.
temperatures overall are getting warmer. And of course, it also means deeper freezes in certain times, more extreme types of weather, more extreme hurricanes. But like drought and wildfires just feel very apocalyptic part of climate change. Like they just seem to be a closer connection in my brain. And I've definitely been close to a wildfire before, but I don't remember exactly when. But last year, when I was giving birth, the wildfires in Canada were burning and had turned the whole East Coast.
Yeah.
Like the sky was red. It smelled
I
like a
remember you talking
campfire.
about
It
this.
smelled like a
Yeah.
campfire in the hospital while I was giving birth, which was kind of scary because that smell is a air quality indicator to a certain extent. And it was kind of scary to have something that could potentially trigger my asthma around and inescapable because it was just the air
Yeah.
while I was trying to give birth. So yeah, wildfires are one of those very scary things. But I'm interested to learn more about all of the ways that we have changed the world to make fire less and more likely.
Yeah, it is interesting. Okay, we'll add that to the list. I have a
Yes,
couple of other things that I'm going to
excellent.
touch on in this episode that I also want to do full episodes on in the future, so we'll add fire to that list. Okay, so that's the drive, basically. I did a lot
Hmm.
of thinking about the different types of environments in the United States, different perspectives of people in the United States. I started learning about wildfires. Oh, and I saw, there were some things too, like I saw wind farms and all that, just things that we've talked about on the pod. So that was the drive. And then I made it to the mountains. And as you say, we are just so lucky. And I know
So
other places,
lucky.
lots of
So
other places
cool.
have bigger mountains and beautiful mountains
Yeah.
and all that. But the United States is a reasonably large country, and I love the variety of things that we have here. And my goodness, approaching the Rocky Mountains for the first time. And I have flown over the Rockies before, but approaching and like really seeing them and being in them for the first time was amazing. It was breathtaking. I got there a day before the rest of my family, so I had a day where I just went to Rocky Mountain National Park by myself, and that there's always a little bit of stress involved with that, right? You're figuring
Yeah.
out the logistics and all of that. But I'm telling you, I am driving up to the park that first day and I'm just like beaming, grinning. Like you cannot help it. Looking. I would love to know for people who live in that area, like do you get sick of it? Because I just feel like
I don't think they do.
how you can't
I,
get
I'm
sick of
sure
it.
like the awe wears off, like the
Yeah,
shock factor, but I feel like you must just turn around every once in a while.
and just smile.
And I feel like people who live in Colorado know what they got good.
Yeah.
And that's they're trying to be sneaky about the fact that they live in like the best state.
Yeah, for real.
They're like, don't move here. This is the best place.
Yeah, for real. Yeah, it's beautiful. I do love the Smokies, and I think that I still like if I took my pick, I would choose the Smokies, just because of the comfort factor. The word that I keep using with the Rockies, and I think I this is what I suspected before too, but is there is an they're intimidating. There is an
Yeah.
intimidation factor with the Rockies for sure, but they are gorgeous. And so again, Rocky Mountain National Park was kind of the first place that I explored. So a little bit about that national park. It was established back in 1915, covering about 415 square miles. There are about a dozen different tribal nations that were historically associated with the land inside Rocky Mountain National Park. And again, we've talked about this, I think, when we had our friend Olivia on with the Remarkable Parks podcast. Maybe we talked about it a little bit. There's pros and cons with the National Park Service, right? And we always have to contend a little bit with our history and the fact that Indigenous people have been forced off of this land. I will have a link in the show notes that shows some maps of the area where these different tribal nations used to live and where they were forced off and relocated to, and the size difference is staggering. So I think that's a story that our national parks are working on telling better, which is good, but there certainly is still some work to be done. There was some clearly newer signage that was up talking about that, but it's not maybe as front and center as I feel like maybe it should be. I just think that that should be, it's an
Yeah.
important educational piece for people who are coming to see this land because
Yeah.
it's such an important part of the history of the land.
And there is always the sort of caveat of we can sign it, we can tell the story all we want, but it doesn't undo.
It doesn't undo.
And like, is it ever likely that there's any sort of land back there? Like giving land back to tribes? No, not likely at all. But it's not
No,
like it's not an it's just it's an option that's not going to be exercised, not an option that doesn't exist, if
sure.
that makes sense.
Yeah. So that's where I think that yes, it doesn't change anything, but it is a story that needs to
It's
be
important.
told. And
Absolutely.
we're doing a disservice if we're not telling it. So I just wanted to mention that. And again, I'll have that link in the show notes where you can learn more about that.
So Sarah, I know we're going to go into the ecosystems there. I'm going to tell you my memories of Rocky Mountain National Park because I've been there a
Okay.
couple of times. And my memory is driving just in the mountains in a way that you just cannot drive anywhere else in the United States because you are up against a mountainside
Yeah.
and the side of the road is not there on the one side.
Yep.
Okay, yep.
Did that. Sure did.
Yes, we did that many times. The most terrifying of which was with my grandmother, who was notably not a very good driver.
Oh,
And she lived there and had the comfort level of someone driving through Kansas in a straight line in flat road, and it was utterly terrifying because it is on a cliffside basically. And I think that that's like the intimidation factor is so real because I think part of your body recognizes that you are in a dangerous place. Like
correct.
you're in the most beautiful place, but there is a very real threat that you could die in a variety of ways.
Yeah, my body was very aware of that fact for sure. So Trail Ridge Road is sort of the big main road that you can go. It's like the highest paved road in the United States or something like that. I didn't look up that fact, but it goes above the tree line and it goes into this alpine environment, which we'll talk about those ecosystems. But yeah, it is a paved road, but there is no guardrail, there's no ledge, there's no nothing, it's just a straight drop off. And you get up above that tree line, especially, and you're just like I was driving and I was like, all it would take is for me to sneeze. Like and go the wrong
I'm
way.
nervous
Like,
talking about
me
this. Like,
too.
I mean, there's like the fall risk, but my dad, I believe it was either Pikes Peak or it was Rocky Mountain National Park, and I want to say it was Rocky Mountain National Park. When he was a kid, he was helicoptered off the mountain because he got Rocky Mountain like altitude sickness.
Altitude sickness.
Yeah. So, yes.
Oh my
So
gosh.
like
I'm so glad you didn't tell me that beforehand, or
no,
if you did, I'd forgotten
no,
because
I
I
didn't
would
tell
have
you that
been
one.
paranoid.
Yeah. There, I mean, and we're gonna just about talk about the wildlife too, which is its own sort of danger
Hmm.
element. But yeah, you are so high up that like the fall risk and the air, like it takes you a little bit to be acclimated to the altitude. And it's such an amazing place, but it
Yes.
truly is
So
intimidating.
if y'all are listening and you're like, well, this sounds terrible, please, like, people do it every
Google it.
day. Like,
Yeah.
that's the thing. Like, I was driving up this road and there's people with their campers, and there was some guy mountain biking, and I was like, oh, like, how? But people do it every day. It is just good to sort of prepare a little bit and know what you're getting into. There is a visitor center at the like top of this Trail Ridge Road. I did not make it because I was starting to
Just
panic,
couldn't.
and
Yeah.
I
I
made it.
mm-mm.
I made it above 12,000 feet. I got up to where there was snow in the mountains. I got above the tree line. I enjoyed some views, and I really did enjoy them because they were amazing. And then I turned around and went back down because I just couldn't, my nerves could not take it anymore. So I'm glad that I did it. I don't know if I will ever do it again because I couldn't handle it. But I saw some amazing things up there. So those ecosystems that we keep referring to, there's four ecosystems that are contained within, or you know what I mean, they exist elsewhere, but there are four ecosystems within Rocky Mountain National Park. The montane is around 5,600 to 9,500 feet. This is your grassy meadows. This is your wildflowers. There's a lot of biodiversity in these areas too. So the area that we explored that would fall into this category was a trail called Upper Beaver Meadows. We were only there for a few minutes. We were just kind of wandering around. We saw a bunch of turkeys. Wild turkeys. That was the main wildlife that we saw there. But it was very hot, kind of middle of the day, so not a lot of activity going on there. But that's, think about your just typical valley meadow situation is our montane ecosystem there. And then there's the subalpine. I think this is where probably I did the main portion of my exploring. So this we're hitting at anywhere from about 9,000 to 11,000 feet. You've got your evergreen forest, you've got your lakes. I hiked from one lake to another lake and then ended up sort of accidentally hiking all the way back to my car. So I
Did you
kind
go
of
to Emerald Lake?
I did not go to Emerald Lake. I
Okay.
went to Bear Lake and Bierstadt Lake, I think is how
Okay.
you say the
Yeah.
other one. Um, yeah, and then I sort of doubled the length of my hike and just walked back to my car that I had initially taken a shuttle from. So that was fun. But I saw some new kinds of birds for me, which is always exciting. But I also really love it when you're like somewhere new and you're taking pictures of a bird that turns out to be really common for where you are, but you're just so excited because you've never seen it before, so you take a million pictures of it. So I saw things like the Clark's nutcracker, mountain chickadees. I saw a Rocky Mountain variation of a hairy woodpecker, which was exciting because I did not recognize it for what it was. I was like, this is not a woodpecker that I recognize, and I couldn't find anything in the field guides, and even like using Merlin wasn't turning anything up. And turns out, did some research. Thanks, shout out to my dad for finding the answer that it is just a color variation that is common out west. So that was cool for me to see. And then, Casey, what animal did we talk about right before I left?
You saw a moose. You saw a moose. And you are the least likely to want to see a moose.
I mean, it
I'm so jealous.
turns out I did want to see a moose.
You
I
wanted to
just
see a moose.
wanted to see it from across the lake, which is
You
how it
got an
worked out for
appropriate
me.
distance from a moose for sure.
But y'all, it was amazing. I so this was arriving at my second lake, and I he just kind of turned the path, and I was went down to explore closer to the water, and just straight across the way, a mom and her baby just in the water, snacking away. Baby was splashing around.
So
There were
cute.
tears in my eyes. It was glorious. Glorious. I took so many pictures. I will say, so we are gonna have to do a moose episode, Casey,
Yes.
because so the mom that I saw was collared. She had a
Cool.
collar on. And so I was looking up after I came home, just reading about some of the research that they're working on within the national park. Moose are not native to Rocky Mountain National Park.
I had no idea.
I didn't either. I mean, so I by that I mean that they were considered to be like transient, basically. There's not was not an established population. So this is from the National Park Service. They say a comprehensive review of paleontological, archaeological, and historic records found little evidence of moose in or near Rocky Mountain National Park. Historical accounts from the 1860s documented one instance of a moose that was shot and killed near present-day Estes Park, which is where we were staying. Experts have concluded moose within this region were infrequent and transient visitors and not established populations.
So are they now established? Seeing as
Yes.
you saw mom and baby.
They were
Yeah.
introduced, I think in the
Oh, okay.
70s. Don't quote me on that. We'll do an
Yeah.
episode on it. But and populations have skyrocketed.
Okay. Well, they're going
So,
down other places,
right.
so
Yeah, so we're doing an episode on moose. Have no
moose,
fear.
moose,
We'll talk
moose,
about
moose.
more of that situation in that episode.
Grilled.
But for now, just know that I might cry again talking about it right now. It was so cool. And I could have stayed there all day, except that I knew that I needed to get back to my car eventually. I did think though, Casey, because at one point the trail split that I was on for the beer, I think it's Bierstadt Lake. That's the lake where I saw the moose, and you could go either way. So it was pointing either direction to get to this lake. And so obviously I chose one direction. If I had chosen the other direction, would I have ended up on the same side of the lake as that moose? And I don't even know what you're supposed to do if you end up accidentally next to a moose. You would think somebody who was afraid of them would research more about that, but I didn't. I just was like, it's not going to happen. I'm just not going to be around moose.
Uh,
And then I
so I
was.
can tell you what the moose scientist that I met said he would do because he used to take samples from baby moose.
Ah.
And so he would like stare down like the mothers because basically what will happen is if they're afraid of you, they will run away and the baby will drop as the defense mechanism. Or they'll charge you. So he would
Yeah.
like have to check to see if the ears stayed like scared or they flicked back in mad and then figure out if he was gonna charge or run away as fast as he could. And I thought that was fascinating. That is and then they would have to blindfold them baby moose because they can imprint too easily on you
Oh
if you
God.
spend time with
Okay.
them. Oh, moose.
Save it for the moose
Saving it.
episode.
Saving all of my moose info.
Um, I'm just really glad that I was on the opposite side of the lake. So
No, that
that
sounds like
was,
perfect.
yeah, that was one amazing animal encounter. And then I did also see elk,
I like elk.
which that, so yeah, I think we said it during our white-tailed deer episode, which by the way, saw a ton of white-tailed deer, not so much in the national park, but like in the yard of the house that we were staying at, actually in a couple of different places. Lots and lots of white-tailed deer, which was fun. But we talked about elk as being white-tailed deer on steroids, kind of. And I feel like that was an accurate, like so majestic, so just big. I saw a male and he just was just
See,
beautiful and
Bambi's
gorgeous.
dad, I feel like,
I
was a elk.
I was just about to say that. Like that was exactly what it made me put me in mind of was Bambi's father, like walking up to him with that just like proud, head held high. That was exactly sort of the image of this elk. So yeah, I think the animators cheated a little bit on that one, but it's okay.
If they wanted
Um,
majestic, they got their majestic. Yep.
yeah, it it was very cool though. So I saw elk for the first time up high in, I think it technically would have fallen within this subalpine my memory is going, but I think I was back down below the tree line. But they're one that will kind of vary seasonally. So in the summer months, they may even go up to that alpine tundra space, which is over 11,000 feet above the
Crazy.
tree line. Yeah. So I saw this guy up higher. I saw him as I was coming back down after I failed on my Trail Ridge Road journey. But I did also actually see elk for a second time in town, in the town of
Yeah,
Estes Park. So I ended
they're
up,
just everywhere.
yeah, I ended up running my 5K that I was going to run. I just did it virtually and it was beautiful. I just ran around the lake in town and just had these mountain views all around. And I saw again a mom and a are they called calves? What do you call baby elk? I don't know. A mom and a baby elk.
Fawns?
And fawn, I don't know. Would you call them fawn? I mean, they're in the
Hmm.
deer family.
Let's
Mom
ask
and
Dr.
baby.
Google.
It was wonderful. And it was funny too, because as I had started running, I had seen a sign that said, like, warning, aggressive animals. And just in my mind, the signs were talking about the geese, because there were a lot of geese there. And
Yeah.
I think of geese as being
Yeah,
fairly aggressive. But
they
then I
are.
ran by another sign and I was like, oh, nope, they're talking about aggressive elk. And so it's not uncommon to see them in the town. And I think typically they say that calving season in that area is like April or more like May into June for Estes Park. And I think that I was reading too that they'll usually stay with mom for a couple months. So I feel like maybe I was just on the tail end and got really lucky to see that mom with her baby still. And that was the only pair that I saw. I get the impression that other times of year there might be a lot more. So, just FYI, if you're thinking about visiting, that April, May, June is sort of calving season where you might see them in town. But then also the other time that people might go is during mating season or that rut, like we talked about
Mm,
with the
I don't want
white-tailed
to be there
cases.
during
Like, yeah,
elk rut.
yeah.
Yuck.
So you do have to watch out for those males in that season, although the females guarding their young ones can be aggressive as well. But that mating season is more September or October. And we should probably do an elk episode too, because I think they do this like bugling
This
mating
is now a
call
deer
and stuff
podcast.
that you can hear. I would love to hear that. So, just so much cool wildlife. And that doesn't even, this doesn't really fit into the podcast anywhere or this particular episode anywhere because I didn't see this in the national park. We actually went down to Colorado Springs and you would think that mom and baby moose would be crowning glory of wildlife spotting. But I also saw probably number one on my wildlife spotting bucket list for many years now was a bear.
You
Casey, I
saw a
saw a bear.
bear. You saw a black bear?
Saw a black bear. Yes, no brown bears, no grizzly bears in that area at all, which kind of surprised me a little bit too. I did look that up before I went. But yeah, it was magical because it was just me. There's nobody else around. Once again, tears, crying. Nature is awesome. And
So cool.
he was just foraging, looking for some snacks in the grass. And then he sat up and we looked at each other and then he turned and walked off as I'm like crying on the phone with my mom. It's back in the hotel room. Um, Yeah, it was really magical. Just the whole thing. So much cool wildlife and just other little things too. Like I mentioned some of the birds that were new species for me. We also just kept seeing these small mammals that we kept saying, well, it looks like a squirrel, but it doesn't have the fluffy tail. And I'm trying to think about other like small mammals that I know might be in the area, but it doesn't look like any of them. And finally, we had to look through a couple of field guides. It was a Wyoming ground
It's a
squirrel.
ground squirrel. Yeah,
Yeah,
they're
so
everywhere. It's kind of
yeah,
crazy. Yeah.
it was cool. And I didn't get to see them because we were driving back separately, but my mom was telling me that they in their car were seeing pronghorn
Oh,
just in the
very
fields as they were
cool.
leaving. If you'd asked me to name 50 animals that live in the United States, I don't know that pronghorn would have come to mind at all. Like I've never seen that. You know what I mean? That's like
Yeah.
it's just not a thing so I didn't get to see any, but they saw them and I don't know. There's just it overall just left me feeling just very grateful. First of all, it was wonderful. We had a wonderful time. I'm so thankful to have been able to do it, but just really inspired by the amount of stuff that we have to explore, you know? The places, the views, the learning about the different types of ecosystems and just all the wildlife that is out there to learn about and enjoy.
I think kind of putting a little bit of a button on that, just talking about how even just driving through Kansas, you're in a completely different
Yeah.
headspace and being influenced by your surroundings. When you go to places like Rocky Mountain National Park, like everything else in the world just feels so far away and
Mm-hmm.
almost irrelevant when
Mm-hmm.
you're looking at it. And our world is just such a magical place. We don't have to center the things that are right in front of us. Like we can center nature, we can center peace and awe at the wildlife that are around us, even if they're not like in our immediate vicinity. So I'm just tapping back into my memories of being a kid and going out to Estes Park and Rocky Mountain National Park and having such amazing, like what feel like some of the purest, I'm about to cry now, geez, just like the purest, happiest moments of being out in nature with your family as a
Yeah.
kid. Like that is just to me what that space is. And if you get a chance to go out there, you should definitely go out to Rocky Mountain National Park.
Yeah. That was beautifully said, and I shouldn't even continue on, but you actually made me think of the place that I actually didn't mention in this whole episode. We stayed at a place near Colorado Springs that my mom and my aunt spent their summers at basically
Oh,
when they were kids. And so that is the reason that they go on these trips is to go back to that place. And so this was me getting to see it for the first time. We stayed in a cabin and there's just, beautiful trails that you can hike and all of that. So yeah, I think that just sort of speaks to what you were saying about how these spaces can tie into our memories and bring us together. And I love the way that you said all of that and that we can center nature even if it's not immediately around us. So well said.
thanks. We're podcasting again. Got to
Yay.
get back into it.
Which is always delightful. Yes, and I think yeah, we got to do moose, we got to do elk, we got to do fires. I want to do the alpine tundra as its own
Yeah.
thing too. I didn't really mention it because I barely saw it, but it is amazing up there above the trees where you have all these little low growing plants and how life sustains up
Times
there as
away.
well. So yes. All right. Casey, I ruined your perfect ending, but it was
No.
beautiful. Thanks for the discussion. Thanks for indulging me in this episode. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hope you enjoyed or got something out of a small piece of that. Stick around. We do have some challenges of the week right after this. All right. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again, Casey. I could talk about this trip for the rest of my life. So thank you very much for letting me make it into a podcast episode.
I'm down.
I, I sometimes I feel like we're so repetitive on this podcast about the benefits of nature time and get your outside time in, but the reason that we are is because it is important, and at least for me it is so rejuvenating, and not only like improving my mood but like improving the way that I think about things. Like I feel more inspired. I feel more positive coming back from having gotten so much time in such a beautiful setting. And then also, like I said, it's inspired me to learn more about the things that I saw. So I have a list of 4 different topics to talk about just from things that I saw or did on that trip. So I just can't state enough how important I think it is to find the nature around you. So with that in mind, a couple of challenges for this episode. One of them is to just explore your country. I do think sometimes, and I don't know how true this is for all of us around the world, but I think that sometimes we can get in this mindset that to do amazing travel, we have to leave the country. And that if you haven't gone to X number of countries, then you're like not cultured enough or whatever. And I do think that it is great to get out and learn about other places and other cultures and all of that. But let's not forget about all of the wonderful things that we have to see within our own uh, spaces where we live too. So don't forget to explore that nature more immediately around you too. So maybe think about planning your next trip, what kinds of things that you want to see, or maybe an area of the country that you haven't seen yet. So
Can I
think of,
piggyback in
yeah,
there?
please do.
I also think thinking about this reminded me of trying to find time to, like, we talk about nature time being walking your dog and taking a run and all
Hmm.
of that. I do think there's value to finding time to spend in nature that takes you away from immediate signs of
Yeah,
civilization.
it's a good point.
So even just going to a local county or state park where you can like be in trees that you can't see the city through,
Hmm.
that sort of thing. You can be hyper local and get some of these same feelings of reorienting yourself. So if you're having a down week and you don't have time to go on a full vacation, which you still should, and explore our country. Maybe a mini version of that is finding someplace a little bit closer and just
Yes,
get away from a screen and
absolutely.
sit and listen to some birds and feel small.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, thank you for adding that on. And that is a thing that I've been thinking about doing too since I came back, because you do sort of miss that.
Yeah,
When you're coming back from any vacation, I suppose there's a little bit of a letdown. But yeah, after being out in that open space, there's a little bit of sadness leaving it. So I've been thinking, oh, I should get out to this. I have a state park that is not terribly inconvenient. It's just a lot less convenient than it used to be when I lived down here.
right.
And so I haven't really made the trip over there too much since I came back down. And I was thinking I really need to make the commitment to do that a little more. So that's a good one. And then the final challenge for this episode is just to learn a little bit more about the land that you live on. I think the other side of the coin of what we were just talking about is that it is like it's so nice to be in these natural spaces, but it's also it feels so separate.
Right.
Tell me if this is making sense, but it just feels like here's where we live, and then here's nature over here.
Yeah.
Like it's a thing, nature is a thing that you have to go to. And so sometimes I just like to remind myself that, hey, this land that I'm living on was here before these houses were here and before these. So I think it might be interesting to just take a look back, and whether that is, the specific part or just your state in general, what kind of habitats, what kind of ecosystems exist or existed before before us, before we came and urbanized it. Does that make sense?
I do. I think as we were kind of talking about this, I thought how bland where I live is compared to the Rocky Mountains. But then sort of reorienting that thought, I live in a unique ecosystem all in its own way. And even though it's hyper familiar to me in some surface level ways, there are also some ways that there's always more to learn about how people have interacted with the land and all the animals that have interacted with it. I mean, we still learn things about how like bees interact with
Mm-hmm.
plants in areas that have been like hyper urbanized for hundreds of years. So there's still a lot of mystery out in the world, even in
Yeah.
our backyard.
All right.
Hey, thanks, Sarah.
Yeah.
Thanks. If folks want to share with us their Rocky Mountain National Park memories or things about moose or um or
Or
musings on our wrap up here.
yeah, or tell me if you live in the mountains, if you ever get sick of them.
Yes. Tell us that, but we will kind of probably judge you if you do. So,
If you want to do any of those things, you can find us on Facebook, A Little Greener
a little greener podcast.
Podcast.
Yeah, you got it.
Clearly, we haven't done this in too long. A Little Greener Podcast on Facebook, or you can email us at a little greener podcast at gmail.com. We are always happy to hear from you.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll talk to you hopefully soonish.
Bye.